Hi guys, get comfy, get a snack, because we're going to read a little bit from Igraine the Brave. So you may have a hard time remembering since it's been a while, but I'm going to try to recap for you. So when we left off, Igraine was back with the giant's hairs. She and the sorrowful knight were back at the castle, and they were kind of working in the magic workshop with her parents, trying to get her the potion made up to turn them back into humans, since they are still pigs, of course. And Osmond is kind of ready to attack. So this next chapter is called The Battle of the Magicians. I have not discovered a way yet to show you guys the pages so that you can read along with me, but I'm going to work on that. But of course, I'll show you the pictures. So this is Battle of the Magicians. Osmond attacked the next morning as soon as the sun had risen. Igraine fell out of bed in alarm when the noise started. Sleepy, and still feeling grubby from her journey, she clambered into her armor, gave Sisyphus his milk in the kitchen, and then went out into the courtyard. Albert and the sorrowful knight were already up on the battlements. "The moat will be brimming over with fish if any more of Osmond's half-witted knights fall in," said Albert, as Igraine pushed in between them. She looked anxiously down at the moat. "Oh dear, Sisyphus can't tell between real fish and night fish," she said. "And what else is he going to eat? We don't have much choice for him, except those mice, of course." "Just let him try it," said Albert menacingly. "That cat's too fat anyway. Give him biscuits. After all, that's what we're eating ourselves." Though Bertram is in the kitchen at this very moment trying to rustle up something else. The tents outside the castle were turning red in the light of the rising sun. The bank of the moat was swarming with archers, catapults, and soldiers trying to find wooden bridges across the water. The gargoyles smacked their lips and belched as they swallowed fiery arrows and iron cannonballs. The stone lions crouched above the gateway, roaring and using their paws to deflect any missiles that flew their way. "This whole thing is getting monotonous," sighed Albert, settling down between two crenellations. He took a small book of magic out of his coat pocket and placed it in his lap. It began humming quietly. Down below, some of Osmond's men were loading up the great catapults with bundles of burning brushwood. Albert looked at them, shaking his head. "Take a look at that, will you?" he said. "They're trying to smoke us out now. I call it really clever to go burning a castle down when you want to steal the books in it. A brainwave." He wrinkled his nose in derision. "Page 23, he told the book, and then page 77 right after that. The little book of magic opened itself and warbled a tune that sounded very much like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Albert turned up the sleeves of his magic coat and was just in time to catch 2 mice that fell out. "Didn't I tell you to stay in the magic workshop?" he scolded, as he put them back in his pocket, and then he raised his hands in the air. So there's Sisyphus. And of course the mice. As Osmond's men prepared to fire the catapults, Albert scrutinized them with disdain, snapped his fingers, and called, "Little birds, fly round about, all the flames will fizzle out. Mix with Albert and his magic, and the ending will be tragic. Your fingers you will burn today as you turn to run away." The bundles of brushwood exploded with a mighty bang, and the wheels dropped off the catapults and rolled away at top speed. Fountains of colored light shot high in the air. Sparks fell into the water lilies and rained down on Osmond's men. Cursing, they ran about in confusion to get away from the jets of fire. But the knights commanding them drove the men back to the moat with their swords and made them scoop up water to put out the flames. "Who cares if they bail out the whole moat?" said Albert as the book of magic shut itself with a self-satisfied sigh. "Those catapults are finished. I wrecked half a dozen others yesterday. Look at those fools slopping water all over their hands. They'll have webbed fingers by noon." If you remember the moat, water turns them into fish. So webbed fingers. Ooh, uh-oh. He turned to Igraine and the sorrowful knight with this pleased smile. "How did you like my fireworks show? First-rate magic, wasn't it?" "Yes, definitely first-rate," Igraine agreed. "But you'd better take a look down there now. They've nearly finished building their wooden bridges." "So they have. Busy, busy little bees," commented Albert, looking bored. "Why don't you call in the snakes to deal with that, little sister? They're happier to obey you than me. Hey, what's going on here?" He snapped his fingers, and a hail of burning arrows shot by Osmond's archers to set fire to the drawbridge, turned above the moat in an elegant curve. Albert snapped his fingers a second time, and the arrows hissed back toward the startled archers, leaving a fiery tail behind them. Terrified, the men raised their shields, but the arrows buzzed around them like giant dragonflies, all aflame, and attacked the archers from behind. Soon every arrow was chasing an archer through the camp. Igraine would have loved to watch the rest of the show, but Albert was right. It was time to call in the snakes. Presumably, they were down on the bed of the moat, hiding from the unaccustomed noise that Osmond's men were kicking up. But Igraine knew that they would hear all the same. A sharp hiss through her teeth, a dozen of Albert's biscuits, and the next moment the water around the water lilies was rippling, and 3 snakes raised their heads from the moat. Osmond's soldiers were so busy laying their footbridges across the enchanted water that they never even noticed the snakes. But the snakes had noticed them. They shot through the water, hissing angrily, coiled around the bridges, and squeezed them until the wood splintered. 5 bridge builders fell into the moat in their fright, adding a few more fish to it. Igraine shook her head at their clumsiness. "I thought this man Osmond could work magic," she inquired. "We haven't seen much of that yet." "Oh, my word! Sisyphus!" she exclaimed, as the tomcat dropped a long fishbone in her lap, shimmering and suspiciously silvery. "Have you gone and eaten another one of those night fish? I'm afraid I'll have to shut you in somewhere." Sisyphus showed his contempt by catching a buzzing fly and consuming it with a loud smack of his lips. "Oh, let him alone." Albert came to his help, shooing his mice back as they raised their heads from his coat pocket and stuck their tiny tongues out at Sisyphus. "That's all the knights deserve." But the sorrowful knight shook his head. "Show mercy to the men down below, noble Albert," he said. "I know they have designs on your life and the lives of your family, but many of them aren't doing it of their own free will. Osmond's knights have dragged them away from their fields and their homes and have brought them here. Where else would all those soldiers come from? Half of them probably don't even know why Osmond is laying siege to Pimpernel." "Did you hear that, Sisyphus?" Igraine turned to her sulky cat with a stern expression. "No more of those silver fish, however good they taste. Otherwise, I'll let Albert turn you into a dog after all." "We're not friends anymore," growled the tomcat. "But I'd turn you into a nice dog, Sisyphus," said Albert, feeding the mice in his pocket with a few biscuit crumbs. Osmond could never do that. His magic powers really aren't anything special. Yesterday he was trying harder than today, but some spells don't even occur to him. Even if he had the books, our friend Osmond would never be a great magician. I'd say he's past grade 5 at the very most. And with a conspirational smile, he bent down to the little book of magic that sat sleepily on his lap, blinking as the sun slowly rose higher in the sky. "We showed him some real magic between us, right?" Flattered, the book chuckled and stroked its own pages. "Noble Albert, would that be Osmond over there?" asked the sorrowful knight, pointing to a figure down among the tents. "You're right, it is," replied Albert. "Let's see what he has to offer now." 2 servants carried the new master of Darkrock up to the moat in an upholstered armchair and put it down beside the water. So here's Osmond in all his glory, sitting up on his dais or his chair. And you can see the catapults, and you can see the soldiers. Kind of a grumpy looking guy, isn't he? "Shall I fetch Mama and Papa?" asked Igraine, trying not to show that Osmond's look of determination made her a little anxious after all. But Albert shook his head. No, I can deal with this on my own. They're preparing the magic to change themselves back, so we don't want to disturb them, or we might have piggy parents for the rest of our lives." "All right, have it your way," murmured Igraine, while Osmond slowly and deliberately rose from his chair. The archers lowered their bows. The new catapults that had been wheeled up stopped, and all the soldiers looked at their lord and master. An eerie silence fell over Pimpernel Castle, and when Osmond raised his hands in the air, Igraine saw that he had blackened his palms with soot. So soot is like the black that you would see in a fireplace or after you have a campfire outside. So it's the really, really black part of the wood that's burned. "Ah, sooty hands," whispered Albert. "I think I know what spell he's going to try. Page 637, book, quick." The little book of magic hastily began leafing through its pages. Down by the moat, Osmond closed his eyes, raised his blackened hands a little higher, and called in a menacing voice. "Rotten bridge, come down for me, to my will obedient be, recognize that my black heart now commands the magic art. Lie down, bridge, obey you must, or you will burn to ash and dust." Only picture on this page is a little book here, a little book of magic. The stone lions bared their teeth and roared angrily at him. The gargoyles made faces, but the hinges of the drawbridge squealed, and slowly it began to lower itself toward the moat. Osmond's men waved their swords jubilantly in the air. "Albert, do something!" cried Igraine in alarm. "Quick!" "Yes, all right," called Albert back. "Have you found that page yet, book?" It's stuck, wailed the book, leafing through its pages with trembling fingers. There must be jam on it. Jam? Thundered Albert. Haven't we always forbidden you books to snack on jam or anything else sticky? He roughly picked up the book and tried to separate the pages that were stuck together, but the drawbridge went on lowering itself. Osmond looked up at Albert with a mocking smile. His soldiers gathered behind the chair, ready to charge over the faithless bridge and into the castle. I'll have it in a minute, cried Albert, fiddling frantically with the little book. It won't take me more than a few seconds. Come with me, noble Igraine, cried the sorrowful knight, and in his clanking armor he raced to the flight of steps leading down to the courtyard. We must block the chain, he called to her. Fetch lances, spears, anything. Igraine nodded and ran to the armory so fast that she stumbled over her own feet. Meanwhile, the sorrowful knight braced his weight against the crank that worked the drawbridge. It was moving as if a ghostly hand were turning it. He tried desperately to turn it back the other way, but Osmond's magic was too strong, and however hard the sorrowful knight tried, the bridge went on coming down. More slowly, to be sure, but it was still lowering itself. And when he finally stuck his sword into one of the links of the chain, the point of the sword broke off. Here, take these, cried Igraine, throwing him all the lances she had been able to find in her haste. They thrust their shafts through the iron links of the chain one by one to stop it from moving, but lance after lance splintered, and still the bridge was coming down. There was already a gap showing in the wall, and soon only the wood of the gate would protect the castle. But suddenly, Igraine heard a shrill chanting from the battlements, and the next moment Albert's voice rang out loud and clear. Faithless bridge, rise up high, or I'll turn you to a fly. I'll feed you to the birds of prey, as driftwood you will float away. I'm warning you, don't anger me, or furious as a bull I'll be. Osmond's men groaned. The bridge stopped, swinging on its rusty chains, and refused to move an inch farther down. Osmond ranted. Osmond raged. He stamped his feet, smeared the soot from his hands all over his face in his fury, and threw first his armchair and then his servants into the moat. The bridge still didn't budge. Spell after magic spell Osmond cast on the castle, but they all bounced off like clods of earth thrown by a child against a knight's shield. Meanwhile, Igraine and the sorrowful knight clung to the crank, not daring to let go of it. Only when Albert signaled to them from the battlements did they cautiously, very cautiously, raise the drawbridge again. Igraine's legs were still trembling when they were standing behind the battlements again. Sisyphus padded up to meet her and rubbed his head against her knee. Oh, so we're friends again after all, are we? She asked. Friends, purred Sisyphus, stalking away with his tail upright in the air. Get away from that moat, Igraine called after him, but the cat had already vanished down the steps. He's always slinking off to that little gate down there in the wall, said Albert. One nudge of his nose, and it's so rotten it opens at once. Well, how do you think we did, little sister? He leaned back casually against the battlements with the book of magic on his shoulder. They both looked very pleased with themselves and the world in general. It was terrific, replied Igraine, peering over the wall. Apart from the jam, that is. Osmond had disappeared, like his chair. Strawberry jam, Albert sighed. Those books have been forgetting to touch jam for at least 100 years, but they're crazy for anything sweet and sticky. The little book cleared its throat with an embarrassed sound, wiped some dust off its cover, and looked the other way. May I ask you a question, noble Albert? Said the sorrowful knight. Out by the moat, Osmond's men were rolling heavy rocks up to the few catapults that were still working. The attackers weren't giving up in a hurry. Of course. What is it? Albert replied. The knight hesitated for a moment. Then he asked, Where is Rowan Heartless? Your sister told me that he is Osmond's castellan. Oh, you mean the Iron Hedgehog? Albert sat down on the wall again. The little book of magic hummed. Albert rubbed his hands together, and the rocks and the catapults turned into tiny dragons fluttering swiftly away. He rode off this morning with a few soldiers, probably to steal pigs and chickens from the peasants in the nearest village so that Osmond can feed his army. He wasn't outside the castle yesterday morning either. He didn't turn up until around midday. Ah, murmured the sorrowful knight, and he gazed into the distance, lost in thought. Igraine looked sideways at him, rather worried. Coming with me? She asked, to give him something else to think about. I'd like to see how my parents are getting on with the magic that's supposed to turn them into humans again. The sorrowful knight looked at Albert. Do you need my help? No, off you go, said Albert. I'm doing fun on my own. Osmond will sulk for a while now. He always does when his spells don't work. But send me up a few biscuits. And by the way, little sister, he added, your cat has just caught 3 more fish in the moat. Very silvery fish. He's sitting outside the little gate. And here's a magic book. So the next chapter is called A Noble Offer, and my plan is to do a chapter a day, and I will post each chapter each day onto Google Classroom. So you guys can log in every day and then listen to a chapter a day with me. So tomorrow I'll read A Noble Offer. Thanks for listening.